My name is Rich Thomas, former mayor of Mount Vernon. You're listening to What Happened Here, and we're here every Wednesday from noon until 1 p.m. on 1460 on your AM dial and worldwide on WVOX.com, but also streaming live on my Instagram feed at Rich W. Thomas and on Facebook and YouTube at Mayor Richard Thomas. Now, today we have a discussion going on with a very special guest and an expert in supply chain issues. And you notice little things become big things over time. Little things like, spinach. Can you imagine if Popeye didn't have his spinach? He would never be able to beat Bluto. But that seems to be the problem at Costco. For the past couple of weeks, I've been on a treasure hunt looking for spinach at Costco in New Rochelle and have been unsuccessful in getting it. And the reason why, our expert, Dr. Zal Faraz, he is a Harvard instructor and expert in supply chain practices. We will discuss these issues and many, many more as we get into the dynamics of supply chain issues. So, Dr. Faraz, I believe you're on the line.
I am indeed.
And we've seen supply chain continue to become a bigger and bigger problem over the past few years. And one of the things that I just want to highlight is, there seems to be a disregard for it. And it seems to be the narrative that was created was inflation is the enemy. Inflation is the problem. But I think, supply chain has been really the overarching issue. Can you provide some context on that?
Absolutely. So, made a good point. Inflation has been kind of a catch-all um, target in terms of blame. Not necessarily say inflation is responsible for the supply chain issues that we had of late.
Mm-hmm.
And it's back. Supply chain itself hasn't been a mainstream term for very long. I remember as a student going back and forth across the U.S. Canadian border. I was studying in the U.S. and living in Canada at the time. And every time, I'm studying supply chain, the border guard would change the subject immediately. No one really knew what a supply chain was. You heard the term, but no one really knew truly, what it encompassed and what it involved. So as of late, we're hearing a lot about the impact of inflation, which is certainly a factor. However, I would argue that there are greater issues that are impacting the supply chain. Things like demand forecasting, vulnerabilities within demand projection, the nature of scarcity, all sorts of other issues, including labor shortages, and even the way people have these purchase patterns and consumer behavior patterns. All of these factors are contributing to the inventory outages of that you and I as consumers face when we go to the retail outlet and we see that those stocks, that those shelves are empty.
Right. So let me pick up where you just left off. So for people that are just tuning in and listening, you're listening to Dr. Zal Faraz. He's a Harvard instructor and expert in global supply chain practices. And we're talking about supply chain issues. And there are a couple of points that he raised as he started to unpack the issue of inflation. But the key word that he dropped was scarcity, meaning store shelves are empty. And if you have empty store shelves, that means you have not only an inventory problem, a supply chain problem, but you have a pricing problem. So here's the example that I was talking with my children the other day. One is about to be 10, he's 9, and the other one is 7. And they were asking, like, what's going on with grocery prices? I always hear mom and my mother-in-law complain about how grocery prices have skyrocketed and they just don't understand what's happening. Hence my quest to find spinach at Costco. So if anybody's out there listening and on the way to Costco, call and let me know if Costco finally got a spinach delivery. But nonetheless, I just want to give you the example. There are 4 eggs in the container, but 6 people want the eggs. That means 2 people, or maybe more, may not get those eggs, because if one person pays the highest price for those eggs, then the rest will not get any. So it becomes a price issue based on scarcity, supply, and quote unquote, as Dr. Farah said, the demand changes because people change the way they go about shopping post COVID. So for everybody listening, we're going to get into some issues, but we're going to break it down so that we know what happened and what's happening with grocery prices, but what's also happening with stocks in the market like Target. I'm pretty sure you saw the news today, Doctor, that Target shares fell more than 12% on the news that their profits fell 52% because supply chain. And these are the things that happen as you talk about going between Mexico and the United States, or United States and China, or United States and Canada, depending upon which direction the trade goes. If the products are not coming through, if they can't make it through, be it the port, that means they're stuck on a boat, not stocked on a shelf. And that becomes, what do you call that? An outage because it's not fully delivered, but it's made. How would you characterize that glut or that gap?
That we would call work in process. So basically, inventory that hasn't been able to be sold, it's stored, it's ready to be sold, hasn't actually been sold. Um, so it's basically inventory that's not necessarily inventory that is sellable for sale or available on the.
Right. So what do you think can happen? Because and for everybody that's out there, you can find a phenomenal TED talk that Dr. Faraz did on human rights as a supply chain issue, which is something I love to talk to him about when we come back from break or later on in the show. But I just want to look at this issue. So what is it going to take to get the supply chain back in sync? It's like you're riding a bike, the chain is on, you get to go, you got it in gear, but once it slips off, it takes a second to get put back on. What do you think is going to take to get our supply chains back on track?
So that's a very good question. And it's a question that the simplicity of the question almost defies a straightforward answer. And what I mean by that is that there's a number of different angles and perspectives that we can kind of dissect that question from. To put it simply, the supply chain is a rather delicate combination of moving pieces that is founded by or dependent on a set of diminished complexity, an understanding of consumer behavioral patterns, and various decisions that are made that might contribute to things like economies of scale, procurement strategies, sales strategies. Now, but what we're seeing is that everything's kind of gone apart in the big path, so to speak, as you put it. And what we're finding is that we are now trying to establish the norm after not having been able to review or not having the luxury of understanding what consumer behavioral patterns have been over the last 2 years, because there's such drastic things. So with the forecasts and the projections impacting labor and impacting transportation costs and distribution costs and the planning for what types of purchases consumers were going to make, impacting how container volumes were priced. All of these different pieces are kind of combined, and they are resulting in what like a supply chain issue that's actually a much bigger topic, because there's so many different that we can kind of mention. Question, looking more of a straightforward question, which we are seeing is that the supply chain is definitely out of sync in general at the moment, and the real only thing that's going to fix this is time for retailers, distributors, wholesalers, manufacturers, outsourced manufacturers to figure out exactly what the new norm is in terms of consumer behavioral patterns, purchase patterns, buying patterns, and try to supply chain accordingly.
So before we finish that thought, we're gonna hold that thought for break. But I just want everybody to know we're talking about supply chains, and there are people that join the topic online that have international distribution issues, and we're gonna talk to those issues when we get back from break. Don't change that dial. Listen to what happened here. Hey, can you ask him if he can adjust his microphone or if he could take us off speaker because there's a loud whistle noise. All right, thank you. So So to everybody watching and listening online, just want to say thank you for bearing with us on that sound issue we had earlier with the loud whistle, but we're going to try and get that resolved right now. But if you got supply issues, be it access to cash flow, working capital, that's a supply issue, inventory issues, you got things stuck in ports or customs or wherever it is, put the question up. Dr. Faraz is here to unpack your challenge and see if there can be a strategy designed to address the issue that you may have. So just don't feel shy or bashful to ask the question, and we'll be more than happy to try and address it as we get into the discussion. But yeah, he's definitely somebody that very lucky to have on to get into the delicacies of how all the different moving parts of supply chains impact prices and inflation. But also, we're looking at how he can help us understand why even the housing market in particular is in such a stressed state with low inventory. So I can only assure you that if you ask a question, we'll answer it. But if you don't have one, no problem. We're about to come back from break where we will get into the international implications of supply chain issues, particularly on energy, because oil prices are ridiculous right now for home heating oil.
Which former mayor of Mount Vernon on 1460 WVOX.
Okay, Richard, he's on the landline right now.
Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. My name is Rich Thomas, former mayor of Mount Vernon. You're listening to What Happened Here on a Whitney Global Media Station. And we're here every Wednesday from 12 noon to 1 p.m. asking the question, what happened here with? And this week's topic is food prices, energy prices, supply chain issues. And with us is special guest Dr. Zal Faraz. He is an established expert, a Harvard instructor, supply chain expert that can discuss a variety of that's discussing a variety of these issues and how it breaks down and affects us at the kitchen table, or when we see it play out in front of our eyes at our local department stores with empty store shelves. As some of you heard, I've been looking for spinach at Costco, can't find it. Also been looking for lower energy prices. For some reason, we can't find it. But Dr. Faraz is on the line, helping us understand and unpack these issues. And if you want to call in with the question, you can call at 914-636-0110. Again, it's 914-636-0110. Now, Doctor, before we went to break, we were touching upon some international dynamics. And one of the biggest dynamics is the war in Ukraine. It seems to have disrupted a significant component of the food supply, but also the energy supply. Can you talk about what that I want to liken it to a stroke. A stroke is when you have an air bubble that goes in your travels through your blood vessels to an artery to your brain or to your heart. It causes massive problems. A little small air bubble can do that. And it feels like our global supply chain for energy and food has had the equivalent of a stroke because supplies have been cut off. Much of the grain and the fuel that supplied Europe seems to have been taken away. And just want to, if you can just provide some context as to how something on the other side of the world is driving two big costs to increase in the United States for food and energy.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So what we're seeing in many ways is kind of indicative of what's been taking place elsewhere. Just now with the Russia and the Ukraine example, it's more on a global scale as opposed to somewhat of a more domestic scale, perhaps more on a public scale as opposed to a private scale. What we're essentially discussing is somewhat of the same. We are looking at the concept of resources not being available or being priced out of the zone in which consumers would be comfortable purchasing the product. And as such, two things are taking place. One is that the product itself might not be available. And two is, if that product is available, the cost of providing that product to the consumer has increased tremendously. And so basically what we're finding as consumers is there are certain products that we absolutely need. We need to use and we depend on. One of them might be fuel. Another one might be, water or grain or, what have you that are provided or that are cultivated, manufactured or sourced in specific regions that might be experiencing, war or unrest.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, the quantity and the mass production or the availability of those products at a cost that we're used to receiving them at now might be impacted. Okay, so in a very simple method, or a very simple explanation, we're basically needing to either pay more for a product that we could have gotten cheaply before because the availability of that product has now been brought into question.
So let's zoom in on the product availability and scarcity. There was a comment that we got online. I just want to share it with you. People, they understand those dynamics. It's not available, the price goes up. But why, on the domestic front, how come energy prices, let's just say fuel prices, is hovering at $5 a gallon when it was much lower? Is it because we're exporting more of our energy to Europe to make up for the lack of availability of fuel over there?
I wouldn't necessarily categorize fuel prices as having a supply chain connection as such. It's more so perhaps a global uncertainty relationship in which we were used to purchasing oil and purchasing resources to provide, gas and natural resources to consumers. And now that pipeline, no pun intended, has basically been eroded or has been slowed down. I can't necessarily comment specifically on the energy industry per se, but in general, what we can also see, which might shed some light on this, is in many cases, while we might assume that an issue is driven by a supply chain shortage, oftentimes there is a significant impact that is due to consumer behavioral patterns and in many ways drastic changes in how consumers actually behave. I can give you a very simple example which illustrates this. If you recall, when the pandemic had first started, the lockdowns had first taken place, consumers found that there was a shortage on toilet paper, on bottled water, on, I don't know if you remember this, on certain types of products that people felt they needed to stock up on, and it almost became,
A fear-based, right?
not because we needed to, and not because there was a shortage, but because there was, panic buying. So that was a complete change in the way consumer behavioral patterns were working for the big type. But now, was there actually a shortage? Was there actually need for panic buying? No. But that type of consumer behavioral pattern impacted how the entire supply chain functioned and the availability of those resources. Now, in terms of the energy prices, I can't comment specifically on the price, but I can comment on the fact that behavioral patterns, as opposed to just the actual resource availability, do play an important role and are very, very impactful in the overall global supply.
So that point that you made about the consumer behavior. So, for example, there was a comment by OPEC. They said that they have a capacity concern, meaning they're already operating near full capacity. And once more people start buying more oil, they are very concerned that they can fulfill that demand. And that was a message they sent, I want to say, back in late August, early September. And I said to myself, there's a problem there because that means energy price is going to go up because they simply don't have enough supply to fulfill and meet demand. Don't change that dial. We're going to talk about some of the supply chain issues with respect to liability, personal injury, how it all plays in, because there are a lot of lawyers listening and chambers of commerce is listening. Don't change that dial. Listen to what happened here.
But this is why it's very important that people know who to vote for,
Mm-hmm.
because when you vote for somebody who doesn't know how to run a country and doesn't know how to deal with certain things like the pandemic,
Yep.
because think about it, before the pandemic, when was the last one? In the 1920s.
1920s. Yeah.
After then, between that time and between 2019, knew how to deal with the pandemic.
Until recently.
Until recently.
I know it's happening. I was going to bring this up with Dr. Faraz. Is that I was talking with somebody earlier about what happened to all the pandemic money
Right.
and what happened to developing our capacity to build and provide for our basic needs here. Case in point, masks. Because at one point, masks were the staple to stopping the spread.
When Obama or anybody before him, when diseases came to town,
Mm-hmm.
this idiot came to town and was president.
The dragon was released.
No.
Close the border. I mean, that was the one time to close the border and stop, and try and contain it, but they failed to act. I'm talking about the air borders, like if it, as he pointed out in his presidential announcement last night, he said it started in China, and so if he did nothing to stop it from, yeah, yeah, do your job.
COVID-19.
Yeah, you're right. It is called COVID-19 for that reason. It's stuck in 19. There's no doubt. Yep.
November, December.
Yep. Yep. And I'll never forget like that whole rollout of COVID shutting down everything was not just terrifying, it was traumatizing, especially for our kids. But to come back to Dr. Faraz, it's like, look, now you got all of these blockages and backups, be it inventory delayed, can't right. So nothing was done to ameliorate the supply chain issues going back to 2019. So, it's been some time now. The question is, what needs to happen? How much more time is needed? Because, you know, uh, there was a question I asked him before, and he went and he did the right thing by explaining it and not getting into the theory part of it, because there is a supply theory of on time supply that I'm gonna ask him about. So, like Apple, for example, Apple has this model of on-time supply, meaning you buy it, it's made within days and delivered within days. But they also have a cushion
Right.
of products available to fulfill your purchase before you come to purchase it.
Right.
But that's their strategy. It's on-time supply.
Yeah. And that's the basics of economics, really.
Right.
Supply
Right.
and demand.
But the question is, what is it going to take to get back to on-time supply? How much more time since 2019 is the question. And I'm looking at, let's say, housing, because housing is an issue, especially for seniors, but it takes time to build a house. But there are new methods and approaches where you can have modular houses constructed within days. But there seems to be an aversion to doing that. So I'll talk to him about it, because it doesn't make sense that we can't have more modular houses available at an affordable price. It only costs maybe 50,000 to make in a modular house. So okay, what's the holdup?
What's the,
What's the holdup? They're energy efficient. They're warm. They look nice. I mean, it's not like, your typical trailer. It's a nice looking structure. They have all sorts of options these days. But yet, nobody seems to be bringing that to market. Why? There's a housing shortage. So how come that's not fulfilling the demand? So we'll get into it.
It's
Every morning.
Morning Westchester with Dennis and Tommy. Weekday mornings from 6 to 9. Right here on 1460 WVOX. 1460. And now back to What Happened Here with Rich Thomas, the former mayor of Mount Vernon, on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. My name is Rich Thomas, former mayor of Mount Vernon. You're listening to What Happened Here, and we're live on a Whitney Global Media station asking the question of what happened with the supply chain, food prices, energy prices. Even Target. Target has, the shares fell more than 12%. They said profits fell 52% because of supply chain issues. We talked with our expert, Dr. Zal Faraz. He is a Harvard instructor and supply chain expert, on the line talking with us about how issues go from a global standpoint to a local impact. And you see it play out on empty store shelves and higher prices because of one of the factors being scarcity, another factor being uncertainty. We're not sure what's going to happen with some of the supplies. Between the break, we were talking in the studio about how much of this started in 2019. And the only way to address supply chain issues that Dr. Faraz mentioned earlier is time. We need time. But the question is there such a thing of called out of time? Is there such a thing as being too little, too late? What is it going to take to get some of the supply chains back in gear? Because some of them have been thrown off since 2019. And Dr. Faraz, I know it's a loaded question, but fundamentally, Donna Dubinsky and Steve Jobs created this thing called on-time supply back in the 80s. And that kind of became the standard. And I think, as you point out, consumer behavior changed with COVID as people grown accustomed to deliveries, be it food, be it, you know, Uber taxis, you name it, app-based taxis. People want things on demand, but the demand continues to outpace supply. You have any thoughts about let's say when supply will catch up in the housing market? Because now that interest rates increased and mortgages have somewhat increased, the purchasing of homes have somewhat cooled, but the inventory still remains low. Any thoughts of when that supply will catch up so people can have access to affordable housing?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I can't necessarily speak on the housing market per se in terms of consumer purchase decisions, but I can speak on it in terms of resources that builders might use and the availability of material.
Mm-hmm.
So what we saw, if I recall, back when the pandemic was, I think this is going back to maybe the summer of 2020, maybe the summer of 2021 as well. Things like wood, the lumber prices skyrocketed. I mean, they tripled. And so, these types of uncertainties in terms of pricing, in terms of accessibility, in terms of availability, are inevitably going to impact industries in a number of different ways. So, for example, the cost of lumber having tripled will inevitably increase the price of a home, will increase the cost that a consumer needs to spend. If we look at labor shortages, that's also another contributing factor. When we went through COVID, if you remember, other issues, not necessarily in the real estate industry, but I remember Tyson food products had a shortage in labor because the entire staff got infected with COVID. And there were all sorts of other measures that were needing to be applied to prevent employees at a variety of different manufacturing and supplier sites to prevent COVID. So all of these issues basically transpired into having a lower labor force throughout the entire supply chain, from suppliers to distributors to retailers and the works. You add into that the notion that the price of certain resources are increasing, right? The example that we used is wood, for example, and lumber.
Yeah.
And you factor in that there's fewer people to actually, do the job. What you finally find is that consumers are needing to pay more for the exact same thing that they had previously been able to get without really thinking twice. It's not necessarily a situation in which the quality of product has increased. It's more so a situation in which the availability may have, lessened, the scarcity may have increased, the cost of producing that product may have increased, and therefore the price that a consumer pays, irrespective of what that product is, will inevitably go up, irrespective of which industry it's in as well.
So then this is where it becomes almost a catch-22. I heard, you know, last November there was a problem out in San Diego, in your area, about the ports in Los Angeles being, backed up. And it there was a big discussion about the longshoremen, the unions wanting their contract. And that may have contributed to some of the delays of stuff being processed. So the question I have is it a function of also a little thing like labor not being available or motivated, incentivized to keep up with the pace at which the supplies are trying to come through, which is contributing to, a slower delivery of stuff, which makes it more complicated for stuff to get delivered. I know it's a little circuitous, but I just want to point that out because it feels that the ports are still congested and there's just products stranded in a no man's land waiting to be unloaded because there's not enough supply of labor to unpack it.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. And if you think about the supply chain on a little bit of a higher level,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because it all kind of comes back to demand and forecasting. So let me unpack that in a very structured way.
Mm-hmm.
When we initially came into COVID, there were huge shifts in terms of projections of consumer behavioral patterns and purchasing power, and what consumers are actually going to do. A huge forecast was that people were going to buy or need more PPE equipment, and that they weren't necessarily going to buy as much inventory from retail outlets. We weren't going to buy as many cars, weren't going to buy as many clothes, weren't going to buy as many, what have you, because we were entering a epidemic that quickly became a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that means were forecasts kind of cascaded from the top all the way down to the bottom. And if these projections were made in terms of what inventory was going to be held on these within containers, then there wasn't essentially going to be enough space or enough need for other products that would be moved from, let's say, Asia to the United States. What that meant is that there was essentially a scarcity in terms of the number of containers that were coming across. And when we actually did need to increase production and did need those, units of inventory, those items, those cars, those chips, those what have you, we found that the cost of moving a container from Asia to the U.S. was triple.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one situation. Now, inevitably, that cascading effect that I'm describing also lends itself to impacting labor situations, because if there's an uncertainty in terms of production, there's inevitably going to be an uncertainty in terms of how much labor you actually need. And if we're looking at it from a perspective of how this impacts an overall supply chain, if there is lowered production, if there's lowered labor, inevitably there's going to be a shipping delay. Inevitably there's going to be an inventory shortage. Inevitably there's going to be a price increase. And what that means is we as consumers are basically in many ways at the mercy of when the supply chain essentially corrects itself. Now, your original question focused on the port.
Yeah.
And how that dynamic essentially works. It's a fascinating dynamic in terms of the Long Beach port specifically, and how the nature of unions and the nature of the workers at the port kind of function. But it comes back to the same thing: uncertainty.
We're not going to remain uncertain. When we come back from break, we're going to talk about what you can do to create a structured approach to deal with supply chain issues for you and your business. Don't change that dial. So, everybody, this is the final component of the show we're rounding into, and we are going to um, finish our discussion with Dr. Zal Faraz. He is a Harvard instructor, and he is an expert in supply chain management issues. We're going to get into what that structured approach looks like and what you can do to help manage demand, supply, and have a strategy to, factor in uncertainty, factor in cost. And I, um, I think we need to go deep sea diving for those brand new German cars. I think, we need to get a boat. We can get the SS Minnow from and figure out how to get those things, back in action. Because that'd be a nice get. But anyway, we're not gonna go treasure hunting yet. We're still hunting for spinach. But thank you guys for joining online. Thank you for commenting. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask and put them out, because there are some great ideas that Dr. Faraz is providing in context on what we can do to deal with these supply chain matters. So I know that from a structural standpoint, if you look at supply chain and you look at the issue of safety, you look at what does it take for someone to be safe? You can literally say, all right, to make someone safe, you have to have enough of a police presence. You have to have a coordination between the police and the community. You have to have a coordination between police and their other partners. But if you don't have enough police, if you don't have enough management to make sure that they're properly doing the work that they do, to keep us safe, or if management is misusing the supply of police, then you have a safety problem. We know that's what's been created in Mount Vernon because of bad leadership, but we'll come back to that at another point in our discussion. But I will finish up this discussion with Dr. Faraz about his recommendations for small businesses, organizations, to how they can, develop a strategy and a structure to deal with supply chain issues. And I will ask him also about his human rights as a supply chain model, see if we can squeeze that in, or better yet, if you want to look on TEDx, go on Google, you look at TEDx. And on TEDx, you can look up Dr. Zal with a Z, Z-A-L, Faraz, Phiroz. You can look him up and see his talk about human rights as a supply chain issue. But I think you'll be fascinated with some of the concepts that he's been advancing that continue to play out. And we see it every day with empty store shelves. So know that it's, according to Dr. Faraz, it's going to take a little bit of time to alleviate that. And as we were talking before break, we were talking about how the issues at the Long Beach port and the nature of labor and unions, and how it's contributing to tension of products being delayed in their delivery. So it's a very important facet of the supply chain, is to have the right complement of people available to do the work to move the supply, move the products. And if you don't have that, then guess what? Nothing moves. Everything gets stuck. But that's what happens when you have these breakdowns in the supply chain. But with respect to Mount Vernon, I do think that there's an opportunity for there to be quality, affordable housing in the city by looking at opportunities to build modular housing, which can be installed in a matter of days. But that's another vision thing we'll talk about when we come back on another topic at another time. But we're going to finish the conversation on supply today. All right, here we go.
With Rich Thomas, the former mayor of Mount Vernon, on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. My name is Rich Thomas, former mayor of Mount Vernon. You're listening to What Happened Here on a Whitney Global Media Station. And today we are asking the question of what happened with supply chains, food prices. What can you do to deal with impacts to your labor, your cash flow as a source of supply, or what happens when your product is damaged along the supply line and it creates a liability for you that you have to deal with. On the phone is Harvard instructor and expert in supply chain issues, Dr. Zal Faraz. He's with Insight Economics. He's going to talk to us about what you can do in terms of understanding the dynamics that impact supply chains and what kind of strategies you may be able to develop to handle uncertainty, um, cost increases caused by scarcity. And he mentioned it earlier. It's about forecasting and understanding demand. But doctor, you're the expert on this. We're winding down the final minutes of the show. Before you give everybody the answer and the antidote to supply chain systems, can you just share with everybody first how they can find you, and then second, a little bit about your background? I believe you said you're from South Africa, by way of Canada, by way of Santiago, as our good friend Ron Burgundy would say.
Indeed. No, thanks for the opportunity. So a little bit about my background. I was born in South Africa. I grew up in Canada. Now I make my home between Toronto and San Diego. Lived in California for the past 7 years. A little bit about my background. I'm a supply chain expert, so I do consult on a number of different industry projects as well as litigation, specifically in areas that involve manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, anything to do with product injury or product liability. And from an experience perspective, I have industry experience at Procter & Gamble, worked there for a couple of years as relatively high tier in the management track, and then moved on to being a consultant and consulted on a number of different projects internationally, which we still technically do. And then I also work in academia. So I am an instructor at Harvard. I also hold faculty roles at the University of California in San Diego. And I teach courses and develop courses typically aligned with operations management, supply chain management, and data analytics. I also have a faculty appointment at MSU, and so my area of specialty, if you will, of expertise, is supply chain and operations, and largely focusing on how that actually translates into a strategic perspective as opposed to just a granular perspective.
And that's important. I can tell you, look, having the right supply, the right level, understanding when you need the supply to fill in for particular needs. And for people, be it a business, be it a bakery, a pizza parlor, a hairdresser that needs, their tools, be it different types of sprays, dyes, treatments. All of these things you need to know when you're running low, because once you run out and your customer comes back for, a session, and you don't have what they need, or you don't have enough dough to last through the night, you're going to lose business. So in terms of people looking to develop a plan, can you just, tell the website where they can find you, and then can you give, a high level structure of how people should think about demand as they determine the level of supplies that they need?
Certainly. So I have the luxury of being the only small in the world. Sure.
Yes.
I can be found on LinkedIn, and I can also be Googled, and my name pops up in a few places. And my contact information through LinkedIn is available, and also I can be emailed at cfaroz@gmail.com.
Feroz. I'm sorry I was mispronouncing it all this time. I was saying Faraz. Feroz. Nah, Feroz. look, it's really San Diego, but I'm not going to correct you on that. All right, it's San Diego. But look, everybody, it's Zal, Z as in zebra, A-L, P-H, P as in Peter, H as in hotel, I-R-O-Z. You can find them on Google. Definitely accessible, knowledgeable, and as we wind down the show, I just want to come back to demand forecasting. It's not easy. You hear about these litigations, everybody, with, let's say, a food product needing to be recalled, or a car has to be recalled because of airbag issues that happened, and you hear about this, and it's on the news for a day, but it's really a big issue that Dr. Feroz is an expert in dealing with, having to go back and trace, well, where did this problem really come from? Because the airbag caused injury to people, but who's really responsible? So, Dr. Feroz, I know we're cutting it close, but if there's anything you can summarize in the final minutes, love to hear your thoughts on, how important supply chain is and how important it is for people to plan and structure accordingly.
Absolutely. So as some parting words in terms of the supply chain, what we are always looking at is a very, very tiered and structured approach that seems to not necessarily be something that can be quickly changed or quickly adjusted. In that vein, as a producer, as a manufacturer, retailer, if you're running a business, key, tag words for supply chain efficiency is transparency and communication. We're kind of working along the channel. If you're a consumer like we are, one of the other key phrases or key tag words is understanding exactly, how to be resourceful and what products might be accessible and available, and how to perhaps adapt purchasing patterns to those availability metrics. So basically, if you are finding that a product is unaffordable, how to make a decision as to whether or not to continue buying that one product and waiting for that product, or moving to another product because of that shipping delay. Inevitably, this is subconsciously taking place in the minds of every single consumer, but one of the advantages that consumers might have is to actually realize that transition and understand that it actually does have a substantial and significant impact on the supply chain globally overall.
So, everybody, you heard Dr. Zal Feroz give you a crash course on supply chain management from an expert, an instructor at Harvard, facultyships at University of California, San Diego. I'm just kidding, San Diego. Love Anchorman, by the way.
Indeed.
And but he helped crystallize that there's a lot more going into the empty shelf we see at Costco, particularly me and my mother-in-law looking for spinach. Too bad Popeye doesn't have it. He's gonna lose to Bluto this time. But nonetheless, I can tell you that between the key components, uncertainty, be it scarcity, the availability of the product, be it some kind of kink in the delivery system, can cause this very delicate system of systems to be thrown off and create a catastrophic, not a catastrophic, a domino effect, which could lead to a catastrophic impact, for example, on prices of certain things. So as we are seeing the economy kind of shift, there are lots of components that go into the supply line that's making things very, very, very tenuous. And we've seen it today with news breaking about Target department store, one of our favorite stores. They're projecting 52% loss in profit because of supply chain issues. Dr. Feroz, thank you so much for joining us, being a part of this conversation, helping everybody understand what happened here with food prices and supply chain issues. We'll be back next week.
Thanks.
You got it. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week. Now, so before I go, I just want to talk briefly about supply in terms of Mount Vernon. And I just want to say in 5 seconds, if we don't have enough people to manage the demand for um, proper services in City Hall, you're going to have issues of the delivery of service. And that's where, I just want to be clear that managing labor is very important because nothing can happen without having a productive, happy workforce. So expect me to talk about that in the coming days because it plays out every day in our community. And I just want to make sure you know that what we discussed with Dr. Feroz, it may have been a high structured, academic topic or an academic exercise that plays out to the empty store shelf. It does play out also to your day-to-day impact on city operations or your business. And I encourage you all to follow up with questions to me or to him, and I'll be more than happy to give it to him or give you feedback because these are things that I think about often and how to address because, as an executive, as a leader, you have to know these things so that you can deal with the issues in a structured, measured standpoint to get the best outcome. So nonetheless, here we are. Happy you all joined. I see